Welcome to Imam Ali's Legacy, your dedicated space for exploring the timeless wisdom of Imam Ali through the profound teachings of Najh al-Balagha. Our channel aims to shed light on the invaluable lessons and guidance imparted by Imam Ali, covering a wide range of topics including spirituality, leadership, justice, morality, and philosophy. Through detailed explanations, reflections, and insightful interpretations, we bring Imam Ali's words to life, helping you connect with his divine wisdom in today's world. Whether you're seeking spiritual growth, intellectual enlightenment, or simply a deeper understanding of the teachings of one of history's most influential leaders, this channel is for you. Join us as we embark on a journey of knowledge and inspiration straight from the sacred texts of Najh al-Balagha. Subscribe to stay updated with weekly content, including sermons, letters, and sayings of Imam Ali, along with their meanings and practical applications in our lives. Ali's logic in order to understand this aspect of Najh al-Balagha, or in other words, to understand Ali when he speaks as a moral and spiritual counselor, and to understand his didactic outlook, so as to draw benefit from that ever-flowing source. It is not enough to enumerate the various themes and topics dealt with by Ali and Ni in his discourses. It is not sufficient merely to remark that Ali has spoken about taqwa, tawakkul or zuhd. Rather, we must see what significance did he attribute to these words. We must uncover his didactic philosophy regarding the development of the human character and his perception of the human aspiration for piety, purity, freedom, and deliverance from spiritual servitude and thraldom. As we know, these are words employed by all, in particular those who are wont to play the role of a moralist. But all individuals do not mean the same kind of by these terms. Sometimes the meanings one person attributes to these words are quite contrary to those meant by another, and naturally lead to conclusions which are quite opposite. Consequently, it is essential to elaborate somewhat the specific meanings of these terms in Ali's vocabulary, starting with taqwa. Taqwa is one of the most frequent motifs of Najh al-Balagha. In fact, it would be hard to find another book which emphasizes this spiritual term to the extent of this book. Even in Najh al-Balagha, no other term or concept receives so much attention and stress as taqwa. What is taqwa? Often, it is thought that taqwa means piety and abstinence, and so implies a negative attitude. In other words, it is maintained that the greater the amount of abstinence, withdrawal, and self-denial, the more perfect is one's taqwa. According to this interpretation, taqwa is a concept divorced from active life. Secondly, it is a negative attitude. Thirdly, it means that the more severely this negative attitude is exercised, the greater one's taqwa would be. Accordingly, the sanctimonious professors of taqwa, in order to avoid its being tainted and to protect it from any blemish, withdraw from the bustle of life, keeping themselves away from involvement in any matter or affair of the world. Undeniably, abstinence and caution exercised with discretion is an essential principle of wholesome living. For, in order to lead a healthy 87 life, man is forced to negate and affirm, deny and posit, renounce and accept, avoid and welcome different things. It is through denial and negation that the positive in life can be realized. It is through renunciation and avoidance that concentration is given to action. The principle of Tawhid contained in the dictum La ilaha illallah is at the same time a negation as well as an affirmation. Without negation of everything other than Allah, it is not possible to arrive at Tawhid. That is why rebellion and surrender, kafir's unbelief, and iman belief go together. That is, every surrender requires a rebellion and every faith, iman, calls for a denial and rejection, kaft, and every affirmation implies a negation. The Holy Quran says the following: so whoever disbelieves in Tawhid and believes in Allah has laid hold of the most firm bond. NTU 2056. However, firstly, every denial, negation, rejection, and rebellion operates between the limits of two opposites. The negation of one thing implies movement towards its opposite. The rejection of the one marks the beginning of the acceptance of the other. Accordingly, every healthy denial and rejection has both a direction and a goal, and is confined within certain definite limits. Therefore, a blind practice and purposeless attitude, which has neither direction nor a goal, nor is confined within any limits, is neither defensible nor of any spiritual worth. Secondly, the meaning of taqwa in Najh al-Balagha is not synonymous with that of abstinence, even in its logically accepted sense discussed above. Taqwa, on the other hand, according to Najh al-Balagha, is a spiritual faculty which appears as a result of continued exercise and practice. The healthy and rational forms of abstinence are firstly, the preparatory causes for the emergence of that spiritual faculty. Secondly, they are also its effects and outcome. This faculty strengthens and vitalizes the soul. giving it a kind of immunity. A person who is devoid of this faculty, if he wants to keep himself free from sins, it is unavoidable for him to keep away from the causes of sin. Since society is never without these causes, inevitably he has to go into seclusion and isolate himself. It follows from this argument that one should either remain pious by isolating himself from one's environment, or he should enter society and bid farewell to taqwa. Moreover, according to this logic, the more isolated and secluded a person's life is, and the more he abstains from mixing with other people, the greater is his piety and taqwa in the eyes of the common people. 8.8 However, if the faculty of taqwa is cultivated inside a person's soul, it is no longer necessary for him to seclude himself from his environment. He can keep himself clean and uncorrupted without severing his relations with society. The former kind of persons are like those who take refuge in mountains for fear of some plague or epidemic. The second kind resemble those who acquire immunity and resistance through vaccination, and so do not deem it necessary to leave the city and avoid contact with their townsfolk. On the other hand, they hasten to the aid of the suffering sick in order to save them. Saadi is alluding to the first kind of pious in his Gulistan when he says the following: "Saw I a sage in the mountains, happy in a cave far from the world's tide. Said I, O high, not to the city return, and lighten your heart of this burden." He said, "The city abounds in tempting beauties, and even elephants slip where mud is thick." Najh al-Balagha speaks of taqwa as a spiritual faculty acquired through exercise and assiduity, which on its emergence produces certain characteristic effects, one of which is the ability to abstain from sins with ease. I guarantee the truth of my words, and I am responsible for what I say. If similar events and experiences of the past serve as a lesson for a person, then taqwa prevents him from plunging recklessly into doubts. 64. Beware that sins are like unruly horses whose reins have been taken away and which plunge with their riders into hellfire. But taqwa is like a trained steed whose reins are in the hands of its rider and enters with its rider into paradise. 65 and 5. This sermon, taqwa, is described as a spiritual condition which results in control and command over oneself. It explains that the result of subjugation to desires and lusts and being devoid of taqwa degrades one's personality, making it vulnerable to the cravings of the carnal self. 64 a bit. Koteb 1665 bit.89. In such a state, man is like a helpless rider without any power and control, whom his mount takes wherever it desires. The essence of taqwa lies in possessing a spiritual personality endowed with willpower and possessing mastery over the domain of one's self. A man with taqwa is like an expert horseman riding a well-trained horse, and who with complete mastery and control drives his tractable steed in the direction of his choice. Certainly the taqwa of Allah assists his awliya, friends, in abstaining from unlawful deeds and instills his fear into their hearts. As a result, their nights are passed in wakefulness and their days in thirst more on account of fasting. 66 Here Ali makes it clear that taqwa is something which automatically leads to abstention from unlawful actions and to the fear of Allah, which are its necessary effects. Therefore, according to this view, taqwa is neither itself abstinence nor fear of Allah. Rather, it is a sacred spiritual faculty of which these two are only consequences. For indeed, today taqwa is a shield and a safeguard, and tomorrow in the hereafter it shall be the path to paradise. 67 in Tatwa 157. Taqwa is compared to an invincible fortress built on heights which the enemy has no power to infiltrate. Throughout, the emphasis of the Imam Tunnel lies on the spiritual and psychological aspect of taqwa and its effects upon human spirit, involving the emergence of a dislike for sin and corruption and an inclination towards piety, purity, and virtue. Further illustrations of this view can be cited from Najh al-Balagha, but it seems that the above quotations are sufficient. Taqwa is immunity, not restraint. We have already mentioned some of the various elements found in the spiritual pieces of advice Mawa'izd of Najh al-Balagha. We began with taqwa and saw that taqwa, from the viewpoint of Najh al-Balagha, is Katabno 191, a sublime spiritual faculty which is the cause of certain attractions and repulsions, i.e., attraction towards edifying spiritual values and repulsion towards degrading materialistic vices. Najh al-Balagha considers taqwa as a spiritual state that gives strength to human personality and makes man the master of his own self. Taqwa as immunity, and Najh al-Balagha stresses that taqwa is for man a shield and a shelter, not a chain or a prison. There are many who do not distinguish between immunity and restraint, between security and confinement, and promptly advocate the destruction of the sanctuary of taqwa in the name of freedom and liberation from bonds and restraint. That which is common between a sanctuary and a prison is the existence of a barrier. Whereas the walls of a sanctuary avert dangers, the walls of a prison hinder the inmates from realizing their inner capacities and from benefiting from the bounties of life. Ali, difference between the two, where he says the following, clarifies the let it be known to you, O servants of Allah, that taqwa is a formidable fortress, whereas impiety and corruption is a weak and indefensible enclosure that does not safeguard its people and does not offer any protection to those who take refuge in it. Indeed, it is only with the taqwa that the tentacles of sins and misdeeds can be severed. 68 Elite. Ali, in this sublime advice, compares sins and evil deeds, which are afflictions of the human soul, to poisonous insects and reptiles, and suggests that the faculty of taqwa is an effective defense against them. In some of his discourses, he makes it clear that taqwa not only does not entail restraint and restriction, or is an impediment to freedom, but on the other hand, it is the source and fountainhead of all true freedoms. In Qatbah 230, he says the following, taqwa is the key to guidance, the provision for the hereafter, the freedom from every kind of slavery, and the deliverance from every form of destruction. Kitab No 1857. The message is clear. Taqwa gives man spiritual freedom and liberates him from the chains of slavery and servitude to lusts and passions. It releases him from the bonds of envy, lust, and anger, and this expurgates society from all kinds of social bondage and servitude. Men who are not slaves of comfort, money, power, and glory never surrender to the various forms of bondage which plague the human society. Najh al-Balagha deals with the theme of taqwa and its various effects in many of its passages, but we don't consider it necessary to discuss all of them here. Our main objective here is to discover the meaning of taqwa from the point of view of Najh al-Balagha, so as to unearth the reason for so much emphasis that this book places on this concept. Of the many effects of taqwa that have been pointed out, two are more important than the rest. Firstly, the development of insight and the clarity of vision. Secondly, the capacity to solve problems and to weather difficulties and crises. We have discussed this in detail elsewhere. Moreover, a discussion of the effects of taqwa here will take us beyond our present aim, which is to clarify the true meaning of taqwa. It will not be out of place to call attention to certain profound remarks of Najh al-Balagha about the reciprocal relationship between the human being and taqwa. Reciprocal commitment, in spite of the great emphasis laid by Najh al-Balagha on taqwa as a kind of guarantee and immunity against sin and temptation. It should be noticed that one must never neglect to safeguard and protect taqwa itself. Taqwa guards man and man must safeguard his taqwa. This, as we shall presently explain, is not a vicious circle. This reciprocal guarding of the one by the other is comparable to the one between a person and his clothes. A man takes care of his clothes and protects them from being spoiled or stolen, while the clothes in turn guard him against heat or cold. In fact, the Holy Quran speaks of taqwa as a garment, and the garment of taqwa that is better. Ali, speaking about this relationship of mutual protection between a person and his taqwa, says the following, turn your sleep into wakefulness by the means of taqwa and spend your days in its company. Keep its consciousness alive in your hearts. With it wash away your sins and cure your ailments. Beware, guard your taqwa and place yourself under its guard. 70 at another place in the same sermon, Ali says the following, O Allah's servants, I admonish you to cultivate the taqwa of Allah. Indeed, it is a right that Allah has over you, and it is through it that you can have any right over Allah. You should beseech Allah's help for guarding it, and seek its aid in fulfilling your duty to Allah. Zuhd, asceticism, and pity. Another spiritual motive conspicuous in the teachings of Najh al-Balagha is zuhd, which after taqwa is the most recurring theme of the book. Zuhd means renunciation of the world, and very often we encounter denunciation of the world and invitation and exhortation to renounce it. It appears to me that it forms one of the important themes of Najh al-Balagha, which needs to be elucidated and explained in the light of various aspects of Ali's approach. We shall begin our discussion with the word zuhd. The words zuhd and radbas, attraction, desire, if mentioned without reference to their objects, are opposite to each other. Zuhd means indifference and avoidance, and radba means attraction, inclination, and desire. Indifference can be of two kinds, as involuntary and cultivated. A person is involuntarily indifferent towards a certain thing when by nature he does not have any desire for it, as in the case of a sick person who shows no desire either for food or fruits or anything else. Obviously, this kind of indifference and abstinence has nothing to do with the particular sense implied in zat. Another kind of indifference or abstinence is spiritual or intellectual, that is, Things which are natural objects of desire are not considered the goal and objective by a human being in the course of his struggle for perfection and felicity. The ultimate objective and goal may be something above mundane aims and sensual pleasures. Either it may be to attain the sensuous pleasures of the hereafter, or it may not belong to this kind of things. It may be some high ethical and moral ideal like honor, dignity, nobility, liberty, or it may belong to the spiritual sphere, like the remembrance of Allah, the love of Allah, and the desire to acquire nearness to Him. Accordingly, the Zahid Na'i. One who practices zuhd is someone whose interest transcends the sphere of material existence and whose object of aspiration lies beyond the kind of things we have mentioned above. The indifference of a Zahid originates in the sphere of his ideas, ideals, and hopes, not in his physiological makeup. There are two places where we come across the definition of zuhd in Najh al-Balagha. Both of them confirm the above interpretation of zuhd. Ali in Qurba 81 says the following: O people, zuhd means curtailing of hopes, thanking Allah for His blessings and bounties, and abstaining from that which He has forbidden. In Hikmah 439, he says the following: all zuhd is summarized in two sentences of the Holy Quran. Allah, the Most Exalted, says, so that you may not grieve for what escapes you, nor rejoice in what has come to you. Luke 57:23. Whoever does not grieve over what he has lost, and does not rejoice over what comes to him, has acquired zuhd in both of its aspects. Obviously, when something does not occupy a significant status among one's objectives and ideals, or rather is not at all significant in the scheme of things which matter to him, its gain and loss do not make the slightest difference to him. However, there are some points that need clarification. Is zuhd, or detachment from the world, on which Najh al-Balagha, following the Quranic teachings, puts so much emphasis, to be taken solely in an ethical and spiritual sense? In other words, is zuhd purely a spiritual state, or does it possess practical implications also? That is zuhd spiritual abstinence only, or is it accompanied by an abstinence in practical life also? Assuming that zuhd is to be applied in practice, is it limited to abstinence from unlawful things maharamat, as pointed out in Khutbah 94, or does it include something more, as exemplified by the life of Ali, and before him by the life of the Holy Prophet Snef? Proceeding on the assumption that zuhd is not limited to maharamat only, and that it covers permissible things mubahat as well, one may ask, what is its underlying rationale and philosophy? What is the use of an ascetic life that limits and confines life, rejecting its blessings and bounties? Is zuhd to be practiced at all times or only under certain particular conditions? Is zuhd in the sense of abstinence from even permissible things, basically in agreement with other Islamic teachings? Apart from this, the basis of zuhd and renunciation of the world is the pursuit of supramaterial objectives and ideals. What are they from the point of view of Islam? In particular, how does Najh al-Balagha describe them? All these questions regarding zuhd, renunciation, and curtailing of hopes, themes which have so often been discussed in Najh al-Balagha, need to be clarified. We shall discuss these questions in the following pages and try to answer them. Islamic zuhd and Christian asceticism. In the last section we said that zuhd, as defined by Najh al-Balagha, is a spiritual state that makes the Zahid, on account of his spiritual and otherworldly aspirations, indifferent towards the manifestations of material existence. This indifference is not confined to his heart, intellect, and feelings, and is not limited to his conscience. It also manifests itself on the practical level of life in the form of simplicity, contentment, and abstention from hedonistic urges and love of luxuries. A life of zuhd not only implies that a man should be free from attachment to the material aspects of life, but he should also practically abstain from indulgence in pleasures. The zuhad are those who in life are satisfied with the barest material necessities. Alina was a zahid who was not only emotionally detached from the world, but also indifferent to its pleasures and enjoyments. In other words, he had renounced the world. Two questions, and here, inevitably, two questions shall arise in the reader's mind. Firstly, as we know, Islam has opposed monasticism, considering it to be an innovation of Christian priests and monks. 72. The Prophet has stated in unequivocal terms that there is no monasticism rabbania in Islam. Once when the Prophet was informed that some of his companions had retired into seclusion, renouncing everything and devoting all their time to worship and prayer in seclusion, he became very indignant. He told them, I whom your Prophet am not such. In this way the Prophet made them to understand that Islam is a religion of life and society, not a monastic faith. Moreover, the comprehensive and multifaceted teachings of Islam in social, economic, political and moral spheres are based on reverence for life, not on its renunciation. Apart from this, monasticism and renunciation of life are incompatible with the world view of Islam and its optimistic outlook about the universe and creation. Unlike some other philosophies and creeds, Islam does not view the world and life in society with pessimism. It does not divide all creation into ugly and beautiful, black and white, good and evil, proper and improper, right and wrong. Now the second question may be stated in these wordings. Aside from the fact that asceticism is the same as monasticism, which are both incompatible with the Islamic spirit, what is the philosophy underlying side? Moreover, why should men be urged to practice zuhd? Why should man, seeing the limitless bounties of Allah and good things of life around him, be called upon to pass by of this delightful stream indifferently and without so much as wetting his feet? Are the ascetic teachings found in Islam on this basis? Later innovations been introduced into Islam from other creeds like Christianity and Buddhism. And if this is correct, how are we to explain and interpret the teachings of Najh al-Balagha? How can we explain the indubitable details known about the Prophet's life and that of Ali? The answer is that Islamic zuhd is different from Christian asceticism or monasticism. Asceticism is retreat from people and society and seclusion for the purpose of worship. According to it, the life and works of the world are separate from the works of the hereafter, and the one is alien to the other. One should, of necessity, choose either one of the 72 al-Majlisi, Bihar al-Anwar vol. 15, Bab al-Nahyan al-Rabbaniya wal Siyaha. Rumi in the sixth part of his Mathnavi refers to this tradition in the story of the bird and the hunter. 2. One should either devote oneself to worship of Allah, which shall bear fruits in the hereafter, or take up the life of the world and benefit from its immediate pleasures. Accordingly, monasticism is opposed to life and social relationships. It requires withdrawal from people and negation of responsibility and commitment towards them. On the other hand, zuhd in Islam, though it requires a simple and unaffected lifestyle and is based on abstention from luxuries and love of comforts and pleasures, operates in the very midst of life and social relations and is sociable. It draws inspiration and proceeds from the goal of better fulfillment of social responsibilities and duties. The conception of zuhd in Islam is not something that would lead to asceticism, because a sharp distinction between this world and the next is nowhere drawn. From the viewpoint of Islam, this world and the next are not separable, not alien to each other. The relation of this world to the other is similar to that between the inward and outward sides of a single reality. They are like the warp and woof of a single fabric. They are to each other as the soul to the body. Their relationship can be assumed to be something midway between unity and duality. The works of this world and those of the next are interrelated similarly. Their difference is that of quality without being essential. Accordingly, when he was repenting, that which is harmful for the other world is also to one's detriment in the present world, and everything which is beneficial for the summum bonum of life in this world is also beneficial for life in the hereafter. Therefore, if a certain work which is in accordance with the higher interests of life in this world is performed with motives that are devoid of the higher, supramaterial and transcendental elements, that work would be considered totally this worldly and would not, as the Holy Quran tells us, elevate man in his ascent towards Allah. However, if a work or action is motivated by sublime aims and intentions and is executed with a higher vision that transcends the narrow limits of worldly life, the same work and action is considered otherworldly. The Islamic zuhd, as we said, is grounded in the very context and stream of life and gives a peculiar quality to living by emphasizing certain values in life. As affirmed by the Islamic texts, zuhd in Islam is based on three essential principles of the Islamic world outlook. The three essential principles, enjoyments derived from the physical, material, and natural means of life, are not sufficient for man's happiness and felicity. A series of spiritual needs are inbuilt in the human nature, without whose satisfaction the enjoyment provided by material means of life is not enough to make man truly happy. The individual's felicity and happiness is not separable from that of society. Since man is emotionally bound to his society and carries within him a sense of responsibility towards it, his individual happiness cannot be independent of the prosperity and peace of his fellow men. The soul, despite its fusion and a kind of unity with the body, has a reality of its own. It is a principle in addition to the body which constitutes another principle in itself. The soul is an independent source of pleasure and pain. Like the body, or rather even more than it, it stands in need of nourishment, training, growth and development. The soul, however, cannot dispense with the health and vigor of the body. At the same time, it is undeniable that total indulgence in physical pleasures and complete immersion into the delights of sensual experiences does not leave any opportunity for realizing the soul's unlimited possibilities. Therefore, there exists a kind of incompatibility between physical enjoyment and spiritual satisfaction. This is especially true if the attention and attachment to physical needs were carried to the very extreme of total immersion and absorption. It is not true that all sorrow and grief are related to the soul and that all pleasures are derived from the body. In fact, the spiritual pleasures are much profounder, pure, and lasting than bodily pleasures. To sum up, one-sided attention to physical pleasures and material enjoyments finally results in compromising the total human happiness. Therefore, if we want to make our lives happy, rich, pure, majestic, attractive, and beautiful, we cannot afford to ignore the spiritual aspects of our being. With due attention to these principles, the meaning of zuhd in Islam becomes clear. The knowledge of these principles allows us to understand why Islam rejects monasticism but welcomes a form of asceticism which is rooted in the very heart of life and in the context of social existence. We shall explain the meaning of zuhd in Islamic texts on the basis of these three principles.